everyone. I'm Paige Smith with After School, a podcast project from Simon Fraser University's Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology. After School showcases FCAT alumni in traditional and unconventional career paths across communications, interactive art and technology, contemporary arts, publishing, and digital media. We would like to respectfully acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Kwikwetlem, Qayqayt, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo and Tsawwassen peoples whose unceded traditional territories our three campuses reside. In today's episode of After School, communication student Jake Friedrich is joined by alumna Prem Gill of Creative BC to talk about her experience as an SFU student and what she envisions for the future of Canada's creative sector. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to After School. Let's move into our first interview. Currently in Vancouver, BC, Prem Gill is the CEO of Creative BC, which is a provincial organization focused on supporting British Columbia's creative sector. She has over 2 decades of experience in the creative sector, and most importantly, she's a Simon Fraser University School of Communication alumni, graduating in 1992. And I'm very, very excited to speak with her today about her path and career. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Prem Gill. Thank you, first and foremost, for taking the time to chat with me today. So you're the CEO of Creative BC. Can you tell me a little bit about Creative BC?
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me to this podcast. It's great to talk to you as a former student at SFU. For those who aren't familiar with Creative BC, we are an organization that is a nonprofit society that is funded by the province to support the development of the creative industries in British Columbia. So what that means is we offer a variety of grant programs, we manage and administer film and television tax credits, as well as operate film commission services and a very large music fund called Amplify BC. So our focus is on film, television, visual effects, animation, digital and interactive media, books, magazines, and music. And everything that we do is to support the growth of these sectors and the development, both domestically and internationally, of creative work.
Awesome. So as a creative person myself, I'm very much looking forward to talking to you and kind of learning about, how you got to where you are in your career. So that being said, can you tell me a little bit about, what you do now and a bit about how you got to this point?
Sure. Well, I graduated from SFU many years ago in the communications program. And at that point, the program was part of the Faculty of Applied Sciences. And I think it's really expanded, obviously as its own faculty now, but also in terms of probably what the course offerings are. And certainly my path professionally has not been linear in the sense that, when I was graduating from school, I would never have written down that my future goal is to be the CEO of Creative BC. First of all, the organization didn't really exist. And I was very much focused on definitely wanted to be connected to or working within the media sector because I wanted to see, I didn't see people like myself represented in front of the camera or behind, or stories being told, whether it was in magazines or newspapers or wherever else. So I didn't fully have a vision, but I knew that this is what my goal was to somehow always be involved in this area. And in some ways, most of my career has been like that. My first job was really around, I worked at a PR company in a very junior role. And then I went on to start as a volunteer role at a multicultural television and radio production company. And I did a contract at the United Way supporting the South Asian community. I worked for a broadcaster. And before working at Creative BC, I was working at TELUS on their optic TV product on the content side and was part of the team that launched a platform called Story Hive. So it's been, a very, like I say, and not a linear journey for me. And that's what I would sort of always say to people is that you don't know where those opportunities are going to come from, and the world keeps changing around us too, and certainly digital. Like when I graduated from SFU, we didn't have email. It probably makes me sound super old, but that's where we were at. And in, 20 plus years, here we are now with, basically computers, in our pockets, and, access to information and all of these things has changed so much, which I think has also changed what opportunities look like for people.
Absolutely. And especially for students that are listening, who are going to be listening to this, and myself included, the whole idea that, your career path is not going to be linear, and hearing it from somebody who's been graduated from the program and kind of out in the world for a few years now, it's kind of almost comforting to hear that, this isn't, it's not graduate, get a job, stay at job, and retire. There's going to be a lot of things on the way.
Exactly.
So, no, I think that's really great to hear. And especially, I'm graduating this year myself. So hearing that is very comforting for me too,
Mm-hmm.
at least.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, you can't put too much pressure on yourself, right? Like there is so many options now. What I even think about, I worked at City TV many years ago, and I was what a part of my job was producing local programming, and I hosted a show called Color TV, which was a talk show focused on diversity in arts and culture in Vancouver. And if we had had social media at that point, like the reach of what we could have done with that show would have been so different than what we had at the time. And that was in the early 2000s, which again is not that long ago. Well, I mean, some of the people who might be listening to this podcast were probably just born around that time. But it is really transformational what has happened. And we all know the pros and cons around this stuff. But I think in terms of opportunities, particularly for communications people and specialists coming out of programs like the one at SFU, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities out there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a part of the reason I chose SFU myself. So you mentioned earlier that, a reason you kind of got into this was you didn't see a lot of people who kind of looked like you in this field. And so I took some time and I saw what you said in some other interviews. And this was kind of a recurring theme that, your interest in media studies and communications stemmed from this lack of diversity in, the media and creative sectors. So how does your work tackle the lack of diversity in our creative industries? And do you feel like since you began your career that things have shifted?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. It's always moving and shifting, and sometimes it slips back into things. I've seen things go from where, when I was first starting out and I wanted to work in broadcasting. I didn't have a journalism background. I wasn't necessarily looking to be a news reporter or anything like that, but I wanted to work at a television station because there's a variety of jobs there. And I remember going for information interviews and being told, I'd probably be a better fit for the multicultural channel. And, so I could have taken that in different ways. Like at that point, I felt like I had no options because these people were not looking to hire someone like me, even in a junior role or internship. So I went and I volunteered at a South Asian radio station where I learned a lot of things that led to an opportunity to do a pilot for broadcasting. And, so things tended to be sort of siloed into areas where there was one multicultural channel that had all the languages that weren't English or French. And what happened over the next, couple of decades is that we now can, my parents have subscriptions to television stations from all over India through their TV subscription. There's channels from all over the world that people can access in their, home languages or whatever it is. But I was more interested in, yes, that was important, was accessibility, but also, how do we, at that time, my thinking was like, how do we normalize who we are as rather than being foreign? And maybe that wasn't the right language at the time, but that's what, certainly in the last couple of years, the language around equity and inclusivity and anti-racism and what it really means, I think has taken a really massive shift in how people are engaged in the discourse and conversation. It seems a little more meaningful. There's a long ways to go, but it doesn't sort of feel like it's just the responsibility of those who feel impacted by it. Now, by no means am I saying any of this is solved or shifted. We still need to be continually talking about it and committed to it, and particularly around the story of Indigenous people in this country and their history and trauma, and really being committed to truth and reconciliation as individuals, as organizations, and as industry sectors, because we have to, in my view, if we're going to get to true a place where we really are walking the talk. And I'm probably going on and on here a little bit, but it's always to say is, again, it's not a simple response to that. I've been involved in programs that funded underrepresented filmmakers. From 20 years ago, I ran a program like that. And I'm still running programs like that to some extent, because we have a ways to go, that there are still voices and people who have not had the opportunities. I am still often in my industry and often the only person of color in the room on a fairly regular basis. So we have a ways to go, but it's continuing to have, I guess, the confidence and support around you to be able to speak to things, knowing that you won't be shut down or not given an opportunity.
Absolutely. And when I first moved to BC, I grew up in Alberta, and, this idea of reconciliation and, kind of working on diverse communities, back however many years ago, that was almost 10 years ago now, that didn't really exist. And so when I came out here to British Columbia, that seemed to have already been something that was set in motion. And now I look back home to Alberta where, things are starting to pick up there. So things have definitely changed. And I feel like, definitely the work that you do and the work that others in positions like yours do have definitely helped kind of get us to this point. So kind of shifting towards, our creative industries as a whole, the creative industries in the province of British Columbia, especially film and television, we experienced unprecedented growth over the past 16 months. And with that came some unprecedented challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you think that, the general public should be doing to support our creative industries in British Columbia?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What should the general public be doing to support the creative industries? Well, I think it's continuing to, be aware and source content that's being created by people here in BC, from film and television to music and books and magazines and all of those things. There's so much talent here that we as consumers can really support people who are local to us and not just international people, but also sharing their stories with others as well. I think the other thing that often gets overlooked by people is that, especially in film and television the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of stuff gets made in BC. Everybody knows that, right? We are Hollywood North. You see all kinds of movies, visual effects and animation is like a really big sector. That these are job opportunities. So people who are in high school maybe right now, or even at SFU, there's a lot of opportunity in this sector for careers. I always say to people that, we have everything from carpenters and cooks to costume designers to lawyers and accountants all exist within the ecosystem of making a film or a television program. And, those jobs that you may not have thought of in this sector, that it's really, quite robust, that there are opportunities to be part of it. And I think that's something that people out there can generally think about, is that, when you're wondering about what your next move might be professionally, take a look at this sector. There is a lot going on.
Absolutely. There's a lot more going on in this sector than I know of. And so, just finding, ways to kind of support that. And especially over the course of the pandemic, more and more people want to support locals. So there's definitely been, a shift to having people wanting to support local for sure.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to shift now to your time at SFU now. you were in SFU, well, before any of us were in SFU, and
Yes.
quite possibly before many students were born. So, what was your SFU experience like?
Well, I really loved my time when I was at SFU. Being at SFU, I also grew up in North Burnaby, and a lot of my, some of my friends that I'd known from elementary and high school were also my cohort at SFU. And, so it was sort of like my backyard in some sense. Like it wasn't an entirely foreign place. But, I think it was the seminars in my third and fourth year, and some of the friends that I still have from that time, or people that I've connected with in business over the years. It was really that sense of community and all the informal stuff. And I'm not just talking about, yes, there was, socializing and parties, but it was those extended conversations that took place at that time. It was a pretty small campus in comparison to now, but I think that really allowed for a lot of being connected to other people. And, I always thought of the communications courses and department was very much a small community of people. So you really got to know people who stuck with communications for the third and fourth year. You kind of mostly knew everybody. It was just the liberal arts approach and the ability to engage in discourse about the world, an examination about the world, about media. The Gulf War, for those people who may have read about that in history books, was happening while I was in one of my courses there. So it became a point of examination. There was just a lot of change and everything we were, I was part of a section in the university, in the program, that we spent a lot of time studying and talking about Marshall McLuhan's theories and writings. And it all has kind of really played out for me in the sense that it was still very relevant in, media literacy was so important. I feel like I'm kind of all over the place here a bit, Jake, but, my time at SFU was one of really opening our mind to and experiences around discourse and reading and critical thinking that I think is what a university education is really there, or was at that time, was really there for you. I didn't spend a lot of time, to be honest, thinking about career. I was really more thinking about thinking and why I thought in certain ways, or how to expand perspectives and views.
Absolutely. Sounds very similar to what it is now, aside from the small community where everyone kind of knows each other because, as you've probably seen the campus over the years, even over the past 3 years that I've been there, the campus itself has grown and the student body has also grown. So, I'm meeting new people in my classes every single semester. But, the foundations of, critical thinking and, our good friend Marshall McLuhan, who still comes up in conversations in, I think, every single class, that's still kind of the same. So I know you mentioned that you weren't really thinking about your career and you're more focused on, thinking in your academic pursuits. You ended up in the creative sector. So was there anything at SFU at your time there that kind of inspired you to pursue a career in the creative sector?
Yeah, well, I think pop culture, right? Pop culture and media. That is a lot of what we talk about and studied in communications, like the impacts that popular culture and the media have on our lives and our thinking. So for me, being connected or part of the creative industries that is where, how can I help be a part of shaping that and that conversation? And again, I didn't really understand that in the way maybe I do now upon reflection, but that was a really interesting part of it, was that while I wasn't thinking about career, in a sense, I was around where I ended up. We knew that popular culture and all different expressions of media have an impact on, the world and how people are perceived and stories are told. So that was really a big part of it, of what led me to this, was that as the more you examined things, the more you saw what was missing.
Yeah. So, school isn't, super easy for everybody. I'm sure everybody faces challenges as a student, especially, getting towards the end of your degree where you're starting to think about your career and everything. What are some of the challenges that you faced when you were a student at SFU?
Yeah, it was not easy always, right? Getting the work done at the end of the day. I think sometimes it was the course load, or, you always had to take other courses to meet requirements, and sometimes those were more challenging. I remember, I think in my final year, I actually took a course that was called the history. It was a first-year course called the history of the Middle Eastern history or something like that. And it was one of the most complicated, harder classes that I think I ever took, and had to kind of really hunker down to understand things. And I think, that happens as well. It wasn't a breeze, certainly for me. Well, I enjoyed a lot of it. But it was, kind of what it actually taught me was like how I learn things, or how I tackle projects. And I still, do things sometimes a lot in that way. I was sometimes a very last minute person. So, basically, what kind of more prep do I need to be doing and thinking about in advance of that? So, again, it feels like so long ago, Jake, that it's easy to romanticize it, but, it was hard work.
It definitely is hard work. I think the students and the alumni who are listening to this are going to agree that it is a lot of hard work. It's, university isn't something you can just show up for 4 years, just kind of hang around and, oh, there's a piece of paper. No, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of, it's a lot of time spent thinking and, making sure that you're kind of understanding, especially at SFU, kind of understanding the world around you. So we've talked about, how when you graduated from SFU, how you kind of took your path to where you are now, and, what you do now, some of the goals of your work. And I know a lot of people who are going to be listening to this are either, recent graduates and, those in their third, fourth, fifth, however many years they are at SFU, nearing graduation. So what would you kind of tell these students who are nearing graduation in the arts, creative, and digital studies, how to kind of prepare for the new creative landscape that, we're kind of in right now?
So how to prepare? Well, I think keep reading, keep following all the things that are going on, in terms of how industries are growing, what kind of skills people are looking for, what's changing, and always be, consuming information. I mean, that's one thing that, despite the different, formats and ways to access, is that I've always been interested in news and information and what's going on out there. And I would say, encourage people to continue to do that, because things are changing quickly. And then also, again, the same way we're talking about continual learning around equity and diversity, it's the same with media literacy. A lot of this ties together, is looking at where are the sources of information coming from. Where, if you're reading a newspaper article about a particular industry or sector, it's like, who are their sources? Are they citing things? Like all of those things that we kind of sometimes forget in our headline-based world. But I say, staying informed, and even if you're not using the tools, like I myself am not using, TikTok, but I do like to understand what people are using it for and how it's having an impact on our society and culture. So all of those kinds of things, and really taking the time to learn about your own biases and where you come from, and what does equity, diversity, and inclusion mean to you in your work and life, and how you're incorporating that into what you're thinking about and doing.
Yeah, definitely. Staying informed is it's very important, but I find it's very easy to, say, hey, I'm going to stay informed. And then, you take 1 or 2 days away from it and it feels like you're so far behind.
Yeah, it's true. It can be easily overwhelming.
So just for my last question for you here. So if there is one thing you would recommend to current and future SFU students and alumni, what would that be?
Don't take anything for granted. And I think we all learned that over what our lives and experiences were like in terms of, movement and other things before we lived with COVID in our lives. And I think really take the time to be there while you're in a classroom learning something from an instructor or your fellow students. Don't take it for granted. It's very special. And even those frustrating times in conversation. So that would really be, I guess, a piece of advice or something for people to think about is things can change very quickly. So really, as much as you can, even on those tough days, try to focus on, what is happening.
Great piece of advice. I know it's something I definitely need to do a little more of. Well, thank you so much for joining us. There's actually just one more quick thing. If people want to kind of reach out to you or, find any resources, where can we find you online?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, so people can connect with me there or follow me and Creative BC on Creative BC is on Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And certainly I share a lot of updates on Twitter and LinkedIn that are related to the creative industries and things that I'm involved in. So yeah, I would welcome connecting with graduates and future grads and people in the programs and glad that it still exists and that people are still interested in it and coming out of it.
Absolutely. I'm going to go find you on LinkedIn right away.
Okay. I'll accept
awesome.
it, Jake.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Sure, anytime. Thanks for your interest and all the best to you.
After School is a podcast project from Simon Fraser University's Faculty of Communication, Art and Technology. This has been our conversation with Prem Gill, hosted by Jake Friedrich. You can learn more about Creative BC at creativebc.com. The After School podcast is created by Tessa Arsenault, Emma Keeler-Dugas, Stacey Coplin, myself, Paige Smith, and each of our student hosts. You can learn more about SFU's Faculty of Communication, Art and Technology at our website, sfu.ca/FCAT. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn with our handle FCAT at SFU. That's FCAT at SFU. You can learn more about SFU's School of Communication on their website, sfu.ca/communications, and you can follow them on Twitter and Instagram at SFUCMNS. Next time on After School, we'll be hosting a conversation with multidisciplinary performer and director across theater, dance, and film, Aral Kapoor. Make sure you subscribe to After School on your podcasting app of choice so you don't miss this next episode. We'll see you next time.